Good morning, gang. How are you? Welcome to the next installment at Mixner's Corner. Before we begin, please remember, and I beg of you, to hit subscribe and notifications. That will be an enormous help to me and will only take you a second. Today, I want to talk about my buddy, Henry Kissinger. For those of you who might not know, Henry Kissinger was former Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, and really had his most impact on foreign policy during the Nixon years. Kissinger was a well-known international diplomat, highly respected in some quarters, but in my quarter, he was one of the most, in my 60 plus years in public life, one of the most despised people. He would go in my top 5. But he was a major architect in the Nixon policy in Vietnam. And in 1969, Sam Brown, David Hawk, March Glencar, and myself created the Vietnam Moratorium, which ended up in October and November that year having the largest demonstrations in the history of the United States up to that point against the war in Vietnam. And so the Nixon administration was really concerned up to the first demonstration on October 15th, when 2 million people took place. There was a real effort to befriend us. And then between the first and the big march on Washington on November 15th, they really escalated their attacks on us when they saw how effective we were, not only in mobilizing those already against the war, but expanding that base into the middle class and blue-collar workers, which we were very successful at doing. So first they sent us John Ehrlichman, who really took a hard line and told us if we didn't cancel the demonstrations, we would be arrested and perhaps even tried for treason. That didn't work, so they decided to send Henry Kissinger, who was highly regarded at Harvard and Yale and those who make international policy as a brilliant mind. I thought he was just short of committing war crimes in places like Chile, Vietnam, and so many other places. Tens of thousands of people died because of his policies. Nations were ruined. But they sent us, and we met in Mary McGrory's apartment in Washington, D.C. Now, Mary was a Pulitzer Prize winning columnist for the Washington Star and later the Washington Post. Nixon she was so prominent and important in the Washington establishment that Richard Nixon actually went to her house and had lunch. She cooked her famous meatloaf, which we all had to sample if we were going to be friends of Mary. She actually became like another mother to me in Washington. Her and I were very close. So she agreed to have the meeting between Kissinger and the 3 of us in her apartment. So Kissinger comes in, and he's clearly supposed to be the good cop. And he talks about all of the intellectuals on the progressive community, the Galbraiths, Dean Rusk, and people who he knew and had worked with and who he had respected, and then said he had talked to some of them about us, and they held us in high regard. So he knew that we could have a civilized dialogue and perhaps even reach grounds of common agreement. I can't speak for Sam and David, but I can tell you I didn't give a fuck because I went to Arizona State and I didn't know any of those people anyhow. But that was his mission, to either tame our opposition to the war or stop it or open up a place of dialogue where we would be less effective in reaching, especially into the blue-collar community, the labor community. And he started off by, I'm the good guy in the Nixon administration, I'm the only thing standing between the moratorium and full-out nuclear war. And if we didn't pull back, he could not guarantee that nuclear weapons wouldn't be used in Vietnam because there was a real caucus inside the White House that wanted to do just that. And that we had to support his policies, or otherwise we would enable those dark forces in the Nixon administration to be successful and escalate the war in an unacceptable way. And so he was the only voice of reason in the Nixon administration. So then he outlined for us his new policy called Vietnamization. And Vietnamization was where over the next couple years that the United States would turn over the operational and decision-making of the war in Vietnam to the Vietnam government. Ironically, that was their country anyhow. And that we would spend millions of dollars of resources in the villages and the smaller cities outside Saigon and Da Nang to win over the leadership back to our side that had been lost to the Viet Cong, the insurgents. Well, we knew that was nonsense. We knew that about 3/4 of Vietnam already was occupied by the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. And we knew that they did not love the United States much more than the Viet Cong did. That we had exploited that nation, we had destroyed it. Over 1 million had died as civilians up to that point. And so he really kept trying to sell this policy of Vietnamization, which none of us were biting. And he said, well, you can't immediately withdraw. And that's when I said, yes, you can. You put them on a plane and you put them on a ship and you head them east and they're home. And they're home with dignity and they're home with respect. And if you continue this, we're going to lose. And of course, that's exactly what happened. We continued it and we didn't withdraw with respect and dignity. We were not even able to protect the lives of our friends in Vietnam. Our ambassador was evacuated by an emergency helicopter on the roof of the American embassy. So Kissinger went on and on about his Vietnamization and how he was the good guy. And I'll never forget, David Hawk leaned back and he said, Henry, what if it doesn't work? And Kissinger looked surprised. And Hawk said, no, what if Vietnamization doesn't work? What will you do then? Will you withdraw? Or will you yield to what you call the dark forces in the Nixon administration? And he said, it will work. And David just kept after it like a prosecutor. What if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't work? Well, he just kept insisting that it would work, and he wouldn't deal with if it doesn't work, whether they'd bring them home or what the plan and timetable for withdrawal and ending this devastating war that was killing millions. So we left with complete lack of agreement, satisfaction, and even less respect for Henry Kissinger than we had, because he showed us almost no respect on our intellect and our understanding of the issue, and probably greater than his, because all of us was of draft age and could have ended up in that war. David and I had already destroyed our draft cards and could have gone to prison for 5 years because we both had refused to serve. But I'll tell you a good funny story about Henry Kissinger, not wanting to not give every devil their due. In April of 1970, we were still working for our big protest on April 15th against the war in Vietnam at the Moratorium. And I was the liaison to the Nixon White House because I had developed some friends, and also because Senator Blumenthal, who's now the senator from Connecticut, was working for Daniel Patrick Moynihan in the Nixon White House and would come and hang out with us on weekends and became a good friend. So he was a key liaison between us all in the White House, and I was the one that stayed in touch with him. So Richard Blumenthal, at that time, before he became senator, called me early April. And he said, David, this is of utmost urgency. He says, you need to leave right now from the Vietnam moratorium. You need to come to the White House. They'll be ready for you. I will meet you there. And you cannot tell anybody where you're going. Now, even in the Nixon White House, you get a call like that. It's crazy, quite honestly. And so I, of course, went in immediately to Marge, Sam, and David and said, what do I do? You know, of course, I'm going to tell you. I'm not going to go to that place with Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger and not anyone know where I'm at. And they said, David, you got to go. I mean, you know, you have no choice if the president is summoning you. But we know where you're at. We got your back. So the White House was within walking distance of our offices in Washington. And my reaction was sort of funny. I mean, first it was the egotistical reaction. Oh, they finally heard me and they want me to tell them how to get the troops out of Vietnam. Totally surreal, totally unreal. But you know how one's ego takes over. The other side of what I was thinking on the march is, oh my God, they are going to charge us for treason. And Richard Blumenthal wants to hear it, give me a heads up and to prepare. And I'm going to go to jail and I'm going to be on trial for treason. So I went back and forth between these emotions. And security was much more lax back then at the White House. And so I got to the gate and the guard in the front of the White House said, Mr. Mixner, they're waiting for you. And rushed me in and I walked up that driveway to the West Wing. The guard opened the door and said, Mr. Mixner, they're waiting for you. And by this time, I'm so overwhelming with just like of the moment, I didn't have any feelings of what was going to happen. And the desk officer, as you entered the West Wing, said, they're waiting for you in the Situation Room, Mr. Mixner. I thought my stomach, my eyeballs, anything was going to fall to the floor. I was so scared at that point. I was shaking, I could barely walk. And I go down that steps into the Situation Room, and Richard Blumenthal, Senator Blumenthal, later, was there, and he said, they want you to have this envelope before they meet with you. I could barely get the envelope up. In fact, he had to help me a little bit to open it because I was shaking so much. And I pulled out the paper and it said April Fool. Seriously, folks, April Fool is what it said. Well, I left the White House. I was so pissed. Blumenthal was laughing his ass off. Every guard that I had went by knew what was going to happen, and they were laughing their ass off as I left the White House. I got back to the moratorium. I said, well, at least they got my back, and they'll see how awful this joke was. They were in on it, and at the moratorium offices, people were rolling on the floor. And then I realized I had to have a sense of humor about it. And now it's a great story. And it's a great story. And it was the last time, well, actually it wasn't. The last time I talked to Henry Kissinger, I was on an Amtrak train about a decade later. And Henry Kissinger was on the car I was on. And I got up to go to the bathroom and he said, you're David, aren't you? And I said, yes, Mr. Secretary, I am. He said, we were in that meeting at Mary McGrory's. And I said, yes, Mr. Secretary, we were. He said, you know you belong to war. And I said, Mr. Secretary, nothing could be a bigger lie. There's only one person that I hold responsible for the 1 million dead in Vietnam and the 55,000 American soldiers, including members of my family, who didn't make it home. And that is you. And I got up and I went into the Amtrak restroom and didn't say another word to him. And that was the last time I spoke to Henry Kissinger. Well, hopefully you've enjoyed this recording. I wish you well as spring comes and we get vaccinated. Please get vaccinated. And as you get vaccinated and make your appointment, hit that subscribe button. I love and adore you all. Thank you very much.